Today, as part of the Healthy Ireland at Your Library series, I'm speaking to Mary Hynes, Senior Psychologist with the HSE, about emotional eating. Now, many of us have had a stressful day and we've come home and we've ordered a takeaway or had a slice of cake and a cup of tea, and we've been able to put a smile on our face with that. So is that still okay, or when do we know when that's getting unhealthy?
Well, clearly, using food to celebrate or pick me up every now and again is normal. But when you're constantly going to the cupboard, going to the fridge, grabbing high fat, high carb, high salt food to calm or soothe those strong emotions, and you notice that you're getting into an unhealthy pattern of overeating rather than addressing really important or upsetting emotions, then you're more than likely engaging in emotional eating.
And I suppose it's the feelings you have afterwards. If you can have that cake and that cup of tea and then get up and get on with your life and say, now I'm cheered up. But if you start to feel guilty about what you had and then you're berating yourself for eating it, that's a different cycle.
Yeah, because you're getting into a pattern of emotional eating. So perhaps it's triggered by what you said, maybe a bad day in work, a phone call where someone was really critical to you, and you're always going for food to fill that emotional void or those strong feelings of being upset. Then that's a pattern that becomes enduring, and afterwards then you haven't actually addressed the underlying issues, and then you're also feeling guilty and in more extreme cases feeling quite shameful. And high levels of shame have been linked to pathology such as depression, anxiety, and even may lead to more significant eating disorders like binge eating disorder.
Yeah, is there a spectrum of emotional eating?
Yeah, so generally there's a continuum. So there may be occasional bouts of emotional eating, maybe, as I said, to celebrate, but then it kind of starts becoming emotional overeating, where you're eating way more, or your intake of calories is way more than is necessary. You're eating straight away after eating a full meal. And then where it becomes a bit more significant, and that's where you develop binge eating disorder. So you're really feeling that you've lost control over your eating. You're eating in secret. You're hiding maybe sweet wrappers or food that you've eaten previously, and then eating again.
And there can be a disassociation from what you're doing, so you're not really enjoying the food. It's like you've zoned out.
Yeah, very often people would say to me, I'd rather feel really full, upset and tired than feeling anxious or feeling sad. So it's almost like that you're distracting yourself as much as you can from those strong feelings.
So what are the main causes and triggers then?
Okay, well, the number one trigger that we would see in our work for emotional eating is stress. And research now shows that eating behaviour is extremely linked to your emotions. So what happens is when we go for those high fat, high carb fried foods, which is the cheapest, fastest, best way to deal with strong emotions, you're actually activating the reward system in the brain, and that's when dopamine is released. So dopamine is great, you feel brilliant, but the problem with dopamine is that it's short-lived. So soon after you've had that bar of chocolate or the Domino Foods where you keep eating, maybe it's chips, crisps, that good dopamine feeling leaves your system very quickly. It reactivates your threat system where you actually feel tense, you feel nervous, and then you have those strong emotional feelings again. So dopamine is often referred to as the molecule of more. You're going to want that dopamine hit again, and that feeds into the cycle of emotional eating.
When does cortisol come knocking, and what kind of effect does that have on your system?
Yeah, so as well as stress, and research now shows that when you're stressed, your body gets flooded with cortisol. That actually increases your appetite and it increases your craving for high salt, high sugar food. So it's not your fault, really. It's an automatic bodily, physical reaction to stress. But like what I see with most people is with busy lives, people are multitasking, they're overscheduling. So there's actually no time to relax, to rest and digest, to look after themselves and to prioritise self-care.
Yeah, it's interesting. I interviewed an endocrinologist recently and she said women will arrive, particularly women, and they're working hard, they're busy at home, and then they're out running 5-6 nights a week. We're really overextending ourselves.
Absolutely. So, like when I work with people, we really look at kind of the soothing, the calming effects that other activities can do. So maybe sometimes just going to bed early would be better for managing your stress, or phoning a friend, or maybe doing something that isn't so strenuous, but actually helps you unwind, helps you relax. Sleep is often another aspect that we look at surrounding emotional eating, and often people aren't aware that if you're not getting enough sleep, your body also releases cortisol into your system. So very often I'd ask people to monitor their sleeping, and if they're not getting enough sleep, maybe if they're on tablets or on phones or on screens late at night, or if they have, again, stress feeds into it as well, they're worrying about their job the next day, then they're not getting adequate sleep. That releases cortisol into their system again, which again increases their appetite. So we would often say to people who are gaining weight and not sleeping to maybe get screened for sleep apnea as well, because sleep apnea increases your appetite because you're flooded with cortisol, puts a lot of pressure on your heart as well.
Yeah, and on a day you're tired, you're always craving something sugary, something carby, something to keep you going.
Yeah.
And we do have an association with certain type of food. So if you're looking for a pick-me-up, you're not necessarily going straight to broccoli. And does that come from when we're kids and foods become treat foods? Is that when we start associating good foods and bad foods?
Yeah, I mean, we often have a laugh in our groups, and I work with people saying, you never say, oh, I'm dying for like a salad, or I could kill for like a chamomile tea. It's like you're craving those like high sugar. You're getting the biggest dopamine hit. So often when we're children, if you are feeling lonely or if you're struggling, you want to create that kind of sense of nostalgia, or home cooking, feeling kind of looked after. And if there was always treats or desserts after a main meal, it might be your default go-to place to feel good or feel more secure. People often describe food as their best friend, or how they feel maybe safe when they're eating certain types of comfort food. I suppose also we now realise that, again, and it's not about blaming people, but parents are overstretched. They may not have the capacity or the ability to tune into their children's needs. So very often there might have been a strong message, rather than being empathetic and validating children's experiences, they may say, oh, let's eat ice cream, let's be happy, and not actually tune into how they're actually feeling. And these childhood habits continue, and we bring them with us into our adult life. So these don't actually go away. I suppose also, and this is, I suppose, where psychologists do a lot of work, is looking at adverse childhood experiences. And there's been a lot of research done on that. There's an ACE study done in San Diego where they followed 50,000 people throughout their lifespan, and they developed an ACE score, an adverse childhood experience score. And the higher your adverse childhood experiences, maybe losing a parent, childhood victimization, bullying, poverty, then they found a really strong correlation between having a lot of adult health issues such as diabetes, obesity, and if you have experienced maybe some very traumatic childhood experiences, they don't just go away. that leaks into your day-to-day life. People don't realise it, that they're feeling depressed, having panic attacks, feeling overwhelmed, and you know, if you don't process and get support around those issues, that can spill into your eating behaviour as well. So you'd have higher rates of childhood trauma for people who would be that extreme rate of the continuum, the binge eating, the eating disorders, and the emotional overeating.
So how do you know the difference then between emotional hunger and real, genuine hunger?
Yeah, I actually think it's an art that we're kind of forgetting, to allow ourselves to feel physical hunger.
Because we live in a time of plenty, don't we?
Yeah, like people don't realise that from an evolutionary point of view, we, you know, from hunter-gatherer times when people didn't know when they were going to get their next meal, we've actually evolved to see food, eat it very quickly, and then lie down and conserve all your energy for as long as you can afterwards. Hence the kind of naps after a big meal. So we're actually not, we haven't evolved to cope with all the availability of food, you know, how sedentary we are in our lifestyle. So physical hunger is gradual. It builds up over a number of hours. We feel it kind of more in our stomach. When we respond to it, we're open to eating many types of food, like the salads we mentioned, or healthy food. And we know we don't feel guilty afterwards. We know that it's kind of we need food to live. It's nourishing, it's good for us. Whereas like emotional eating tends to be above the head. It comes on all of a sudden. We get this huge urge for those, you know, high fat, high sugar foods. Often we're engaging in mindless eating at the time. So we're like on a computer, we're watching TV, we're on our screens, we're not even noticing that we're eating. And very often we don't stop eating when we feel full. We'll just continue eating. So we'll eat very soon after eating a main meal. And then it's very much coupled with that strong emotion like anxiety or sadness or feeling overwhelmed. And then we have that long-term kind of feeling of shame afterwards, that it's out of our control. And very often it's paired with eating what I call domino foods, foods that once we start eating them, everyone has their own domino food. So you need to know what your own personal story is. Some people it's crisps, so they won't just eat one pack, they'll eat 6. So other people it's biscuits. And when I work with people don't realise, and we call it the 2 will do rule, that you get the same dopamine hit from your reward system in the brain from having 2 chocolate biscuits as from having the whole pack of biscuits, but you don't have that guilt feeling afterwards that you've blown it, and then that negative self-thought afterwards.
So what are the health impacts then if you are an emotional eater?
Yeah, so as we said, you know, emotional eating works. You get that pick-me-up, but unfortunately it jeopardizes your weight management plan. As I said, with the domino food, all your eating plans go out the window. Then it also is linked with a lot of physical health issues like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, sleep apnea, like I mentioned earlier, and obesity.
So how can we get a handle on it? If you are somebody who is reaching for food as a crutch, how can you handle that stress or that anxiety or whatever it is that's going on and deal with it another way?
Well, I suppose the first stage is that you have to get some support around your stress, because having cortisol flooding your system is really not good for your physical or mental health. So the first line of support we would often recommend for people is bibliotherapy. So that could be in your local libraries, where they would have many books and resources to give you information on how to manage your emotional eating. So, you know, knowledge is empowering. The second one is really to actually get some professional support to deal with stress. So that could be your local counselling and primary care services, your local psychology services. You know, a GP can easily make a referral if you feel it's veering more towards the eating disorder or the binge eating disorder, which is very much out of your control. But, you know, on a practical level, ask your friends and family for some help. You know, what we do notice is a main what contributes to that emotional eating is people stop actually accessing the support from their friends and family. You know, very practical things such as research now shows that you can reduce emotional eating by 70% if you actually keep those high-fat, high-sugar foods out of reach. So even having to get a step ladder up to something, you know, puts it off a bit. Personally, we keep all our sweet food in the boot of my car. So it just makes it a little bit more difficult to access that.
So you think
food.
twice before just reaching for it.
Yeah, you know, but certainly I think get your sleep pattern right, because if you're not getting adequate sleep, you know, we use a more compassionate approach, because as I explained earlier, it is out of our control. You know, from an evolution point of view, we really aren't able to cope with the amount of food that's around us, the availability of food. I'm sure you've heard many people saying that sitting is the new smoking, that if you sit for more than 30 minutes, you reduce your metabolism by 90%. So stand up, move around. If you are feeling strong emotions, maybe get some help, acknowledge it, validate it, be more mindful in your eating. So again, as I mentioned, that physical hunger, know the difference between physical and emotional hunger. Yeah. Slow down.
Sit away from the screens, really be mindful and enjoy that meal. Don't be beating yourself up about it. Enjoy what you're eating and enjoy your food.
Absolutely.
And you suggest keeping a diary. So if you are somebody who is emotionally eating, you'll start to see a correlation that it might be a phone call from work or a visit to a family member where there's a stressful situation that then leads to the emotional eating. And sometimes even acknowledging that helps you to break that cycle.
Yeah, because very often I just say to people simply, if they're very busy, is just take photographs of the food you eat for a week, and see if you can backtrack and see what happened before that. Like I started emotional eating. Very often you'll see it could be, spending time with very depleting people, toxic people, very critical boss. So there's usually triggers. And once you are aware of your trigger, and I often use the word, become more conscious about your eating, become more aware of your eating, then you can slowly, step by step, begin to take control. And I suppose one thing that I think is really important, because I know when we talked about the adverse childhood experiences, you can get support to learn how to process that unaddressed mental health issues, maybe, that will help you cope alternatively to the emotional eating. But I always say to people, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. You can always bring the fun and the connections with people back into your life.
And if you go for something like talk therapy, how soon will you start to see a difference in your life? How soon can you turn around something like emotional eating, do you think?
Well, what I notice with the groups we offer people in particular, and we use a compassion-focused therapy approach where it's immediately people begin to realise how self-critical they are of themselves. So, you know, that self-critic is running the show. I mean, it's amazing, even on the first session, when people fill out a questionnaire looking at their levels of shame, how they realise that kind of negative talk in their head, like saying, oh, you're useless, you're stupid, you know, why can't you whip yourself back into shape? Whereas if you can change those neural pathways in the brain, that you're accessing, you know, a new version of yourself, a more compassionate version of yourself that's kinder, that realizes that, you know, life is hard, it's full of suffering, pain for people, but that this new version of yourself can actually learn to cope better in the world. That very often after 5 or 6 sessions, people are really making dramatic changes in their life. So, you know, I would always say it's always possible to change. We can always gain control over our food.
And I'm all for the power of positive thinking and looking on the bright side. But I think with all of that message out there, we forget that it's okay to feel negative sometimes. Yeah. And all the negative feelings like anxiety, stress, anger, sadness, they're very normal feelings and part of being a human.
Yeah, because if we didn't have a threat system, it's a better be safe than sorry system, we wouldn't actually, it cues us really into self-care. So if we can kind of shift that kind of belief that, I shouldn't be feeling that, and if you think that goes back to the non-validating your feelings.
Yeah, and I need to dampen it down with food and disguise it, just feel it.
Yeah, so just to stay with the feeling, delay, the cravings for 5 minutes, just say, how am I feeling? I'm actually, what often people would say is they pause, they take a deep breath, they slow down, and then they realise, I've just got a banging headache. I'm stressed, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, and I've just been, running through the day, not actually touching into how I'm feeling. And it's like what I said, we've forgotten that art of feeling hunger and saying it's actually okay to feel a bit hungry, I'll be eating again in 2 hours' time.
Getting out for a walk is a healthier way of handling stress, and
Absolutely.
slowing down, as you say, not being as overwhelmed with our schedules, maybe not booking ourselves so crazy.
Yeah, and I think, everyone has to find their own way of managing stress. So for one person it might be going for a walk or a swim, but for someone else it might be, belly dancing classes, an art class, having a chat with a friend. So again, it's about not trying to, whip yourself into shape.
Yeah,
it's about finding, this is what works for me, and prioritising your self-care.
Obviously, there've been unprecedented times and people have been stressed due to COVID-19, and cooking became a big thing, cooking and baking, but people were emotionally eating through this time.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, their usual sources of dealing with stress, like maybe their running group or their art group, were all cancelled, or for elderly people in particular, the active retirement groups were cancelled, for infection control issues. That very often we went back to that nostalgia, that kind of good feeling, home-cooked meals. And people are probably not aware, but in our clinic, the average weight gain for people over COVID was 15 kg. So I think once people heard that, it wasn't just them, they weren't the only person that was emotionally eating. Again, it was an attempt to control, or an attempt to reduce their stress levels, because no one expected this, no one had the skills to deal with this, but thankfully through a lot of media advice and Ask the Expert programs that we're on, and advice from the local HSE and the library services as well, that people are now beginning to feel a bit more empowered and are taking back control. So I think, I haven't heard recently of any of the shops running out of white flour, but so I think people are just getting back on track again. They're not letting their anxious selves run the show. And
as you say, you can catch it, you can stop it, but do it with compassion. Don't beat yourself up, just start again, and you can make a difference.
Yeah, because like the research backs it up now. If you're criticising yourself, if you're giving yourself a hard time, then you're going back into that emotional eating cycle. So I think kindness, being non-judgmental towards yourself, realising that you, just like everyone else, is finding it difficult. This is a difficult time, but with the support of your friends and family, or even professional support, you will be able to get through this, and you'll learn some self-care skills that will stand with you through life, and also what we're modelling to our children on how to cope. We don't, if we were to choose a teacher that we'd like to send our kids to, would we like the critical teacher who's always focusing on their weaknesses, who's putting them down, who focus on their mistakes, or would we prefer a more compassionate teacher that focuses on their positives, focuses on their strengths? And maybe we should choose that teacher for ourselves, to be kinder towards ourselves.
So Mary, what would be the key take-home message for people today?
Well, if you, from what we're saying, think that you're an emotional eater, access some support. And even if you are struggling, there's always help out there. I think, identify your triggers, try to become aware of your Domino Foods, where you'll keep eating more and more, and keep your stress levels down. and make sure you're getting a good night's sleep, because all of these will increase your cortisol levels, which will be out of your control. You'll get cravings for salty, sugary foods. So there's always support out there, and I think with adequate support, you'll be able to learn to take back control and find alternative, more constructive ways to deal with stress.
And it's not about taking the joy out of food, it's about finding it again. So you've
Absolutely.
got rid of all of that guilt.
Yeah, I mean, I love that Bob Dylan line, you can have your cake and eat it too. It's not about restricting food, because anything you restrict, you're going to overeat. So it's about getting a balance back into your life.
Mary, thank you very much.